New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
New Thought Media Network is proud to present New Thought's Roots and Branches with Reverend Dr. Ruth Miller. Join us every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Mountain Time. Tune in live or watch anytime on our YouTube channel. Discover the rich history of New Thought and its impact on modern spirituality. Join Reverend Dr. Ruth Miller as she shares insights, stories, and teachings that inspire and uplift. Experience deep insights and transformative teachings that connect you to the roots of New Thought. Visit our YouTube channel to catch up on past episodes and join us live every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Connect with us and be part of the journey.
Hi there. I am Ruth Miller, and this is New Thought Roots and Branches. And this is the third in our series of exploring what was happening in Great Britain at the time, things that were happening here in the States. And today we begin the overlap because we're going to be talking about the remarkably famous Emmet Fox. Emmet Fox. Many people know this name who have never, ever heard of New Thought or Unity or religious science or science of mind or any of those other things because they have read works of his in association with the 12-step movement, in particular Alcoholics Anonymous. And we will find out why as we go forward. If we look at the next slide, we can see where Emmet fits in our branch. There near the bottom, over there in the corner. He is in this new generation. Everybody that we've been talking about for the last several weeks are the generation that was pretty much complete by 1940, most of them the 1930s. And Emmet breached from the 30s into the 50s. And so he is that next generation of speakers. And yet, as we will see in the next slide, he was very much connected with Thomas Troward. Over there, you can see that circle over there on the side, and he was directly under Thomas Troward. So he was truly a bridge from that 19th century version of what became New Thought and the 20th century. If we look at the photos in the next slide, we actually kind of get a sense of that. The darker photo, it says 1930s. He was speaking in England from 1928 to 1931, and this was his headshot. And then in the 1940s, he was speaking in the US, and that was his headshot. There is one version of this headshot that's done where someone just flipped the picture, but it's the same person. And these are the only photos that are published for Emmet Fox that I've been able to find. So let's find out about this guy. This man was an Irishman. Not a whole lot of people knew that, but you could kind of hear it in his intonation in some of his talks. He was very well bred. His father was a physician and a member of parliament. Oh my goodness. So he was part of the in crowd in both Ireland and in England. And of course, in Ireland, and at that time, he was raised Irish Catholic. Now, Irish Catholic is different from Roman Catholic, although technically they both come in under the Pope. But the Irish Catholic tradition is much more holistic, much more earth-centered in many ways, has some of the oldest history of Catholicism in the whole Roman tradition and the whole Catholic tradition. So we're looking at a slight variation, shall we say, on the Catholic tradition that the Europeans might have experienced. And he discovered in his teens that when people were hurting, he could help them heal. which he found very confusing because even in the Irish Catholic tradition, only saints could do that. He did go through a Jesuit program, which is great. If you're not familiar with the different orders within the Catholic tradition, the Jesuits are the ones who are very, very scholarly. If there is a scientist at the Vatican, he's probably a Jesuit. In fact, when our last Pope, Pope Francis, was elected, I was blown away because Jesuits are never popes, because the Jesuit lead is considered the gray eminence. And he is bringing that bridge into the world of the sciences, whereas the Pope, the head of the Holy See, is being the one who is supposedly enforcing the doctrine. To bring the Jesuit and the Pope into one being, as we did in Pope Francis, was truly a turning point in Catholic tradition. Well, our friend Emmet here went to a Jesuit college, St. Ignatius in England, and it really affected his learning process. And because it was a Jesuit school, he could become an electrical engineer. And I'm convinced he became an electrical engineer because, as we'll see in the next slide, he found a person that we know called Thomas Troward. His issue was, why could he heal others? You know, he knew he wasn't Christ. He knew he was just a normal human being. And he probably had had his normal behavior issues as a teenager and as a young boy. In Ireland, he would have been told about it quite a bit. He knew that there was something going on here and he didn't know what it was. So I'm convinced he went into electrical engineering because he became aware of the possibility that the theory around electricity and around radios and such things could possibly explain what he was doing. He also, in a remarkable break for a good Catholic boy, went and checked out those Christian Scientists. Oh my goodness. Well, they healed others and he wanted to know how. So he did learn the methods that the British version of Christian Science was teaching. Now, I happen to know some people in England today who are British Christian Scientists. And as Irish Catholicism is a little different from Roman Catholicism, British Christian Science is a little different from the Bostonian Christian Science or the left coast Christian Scientists that many of us know about here in Oregon and California. So it's much more centered in the groundedness of being, in connection with the earth, in connection with the body, much less intellectual. And also, Mrs. Eddy is revered, not just as a teacher, but as very nearly a saint among the people that I know anyway in the British Christian Science tradition. So he needed to understand the how. He went to the one place where it was being talked about. Every Wednesday night in every Christian Science church, we have testimonials of how using the practice helped heal the body. And then he heard Thomas Troward. And Thomas not only healed other folks, as we heard when we were talking about him a couple of weeks back, but he had a scientific framework for it. He seemed to understand how and why it happened. So in the next slide, we see that what he found with Thomas Troward's work was a science. It had to do with electric fields. It had to do with vibrations. That's what cymatics is about. It had to do with the way that vibrations can affect electric fields, which is what radio is about. And he also had a very specific process, which was framed in science, not framed in Christian theology as Christian Science is. And he saw that bridge and he understood. And with the engineer's mind, he would cut to the core. And we will see more about that as we go forth. So he was working so closely with Thomas Troward that when Troward was elected to help create the INTA meeting in London, then we had James Allen, or in this case, Emmet Fox. Both of them were present, James Allen and Emmet Fox, but Emmet Fox was there with them. And he began to listen to these American speakers. He began to listen to more of the British New Thought folks. He began to develop his own style and his own framework for talking about these things. So in 1914, this kid is like 28, right? And he's just become an electrical engineer. So he's launching his career, working with different companies, and spent the next 14 years being an electrical engineer, practicing being a healer, studying with Troward, who passed on very soon after that meeting. And then finally, in 1928, we get his first formal lecture, which was very well received and paid him enough that he could go out and get that headshot in the beginning of our series here today and begin to set up a number of others along the way. Finally, after a couple of years of practicing in Britain, he took the big step, got on a ship and headed to New York. And we'll see in the next slide that when he got to New York, he was immediately embraced. People loved his talks. He became a guest speaker at a number of Unity and other New Thought churches around the area. But in 1931, James Murray retired as the minister of Divine Science Church of the Healing Christ. And actually, it was just the Church of the Healing Christ that James Murray was the head of. And in 31, the board said, "We want you, Mr. Fox, but you're not ordained." Well, Emmet had been very intrigued with Unity. And one of the things that he did when he came over to this country right away was go to Unity Village and connect with Charles Fillmore. It was the year, if you remember from our conversations then, it was the year that Myrtle was passing on. So Fox knew about both of them, but he only got to know Charles. And he adopted Charles as his spiritual father, if you will, and went back to Unity Village many, many times. However, Charles said, "I'm sorry, you haven't gone through our training program. I see that you really understand these principles, but I cannot ordain you. I have to have my standards." What a disappointment. And boy, has that been a disappointment for many, many, many people over the years who thought they wanted to be Unity ministers, but weren't able to go through the program to make that happen. Well, it happened that another guest speaker at the Church of Healing Christ was the Divine Science minister and head of the branch at that time, that denomination, Nona Brooks. So she was guest speaking there, and Nona Brooks was guest speaking there, and many others did, in the ballroom of the hotel. Outside the ballroom, they would have tables full of books, and people would buy books and pamphlets. And inside, they would be granted a wonderful service with lots of music. And one of the things that people loved about Emmet Fox was his meditations. He would lead them on these deep, deep meditations that lifted them out of, 1931, the pain of the Depression. Oh, wow. It was amazing. And then he would give these precisely 20-minute talks that were absolutely clear. And we'll look at some of the things he said here in a moment. So after the Waldorf Astoria ballroom got too full, they'd opened up all the sections. They had to rent another place and then another place. They ended up in the Hippodrome and in Carnegie Hall. 5,000 to 5,500 and sometimes more people attending a Sunday service, and 2,000 or 3,000 attending Wednesday evening services. It was amazing. And so amazing that the newspapers commented on how many people were showing up in these places to hear somebody talk. How strange that was. And then they would fold up everything, pack it up, take it back to the offices, and our minister would go home to his rooms in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. He never got a place of his own. He only rented rooms. So they rented an office, they rented space to do their church services, and he rented rooms. My. Well, one of the interesting things we know about Emmet Fox is that he was not only uplifting people by the thousands in New York during the Depression, but he was turning those sermons into books. And if you've ever picked up a book by Emmet Fox, you'll see it's a series of short chapters. That's because each book is a series of sermons. Makes it easy. And so one of his books, The Sermon on the Mount, is describing what we call the Beatitudes, where Jesus is saying, blessed are the poor, blessed are those who have been persecuted, and so on. And he explains those in New Thought terms that make sense. Well, that book made sense to a few men who are trying to get off of alcohol, who are being overwhelmed by their addiction to alcohol. And one of those men was the son of Emmet Fox's secretary. And he would share Emmet's books and articles and brochures with these guys who were meeting in a club in New York City, trying to use various Christian methods to get off of their alcoholic addictions. And they started showing up at Emmet's services after their meetings. All of them. I've gone into quite a bit of detail on this in my other work on the biography of Emmet Fox, which you can chase down. But in any case, they would go to see and listen to him. They would read his material, and it became core to the work that they were doing, so that when they finally ended up in Akron, Ohio, forming Alcoholics Anonymous, they were using Emmet Fox's material as a core part of that work. So let's look at some of the things he produced from those sermons. I just have a few here. It's now quite a bit later. It's almost 70 years since he's passed. It's over 70 years since he passed. So there's really only 7 or 8 books that people are really aware of right now. And these are most of them. The one with the red, The Sermon on the Mount, has probably been in 15 different editions over the 17 years and is the one most often read by people in the 12-step program. The one next to it there, the 10 Commandments, that's another one that's often read by people in those programs. The other ones are ones that actually have been helpful to me. That Golden Key pamphlet was one of my introductions to New Thought. When I was dealing with a health issue years and years ago that had me totally incapacitated and with a lousy prognosis, the Golden Key was a marvelous tool that helped me see that I could possibly overcome these challenges. Basically, he's saying, if you have any kind of issue or problem that you're focusing on, allow yourself to let go of focusing on the problem and start. And true expression is what we call demonstration, because it demonstrates the law of being. Okay? In New Thought, we talk a lot about demonstration. Oh, I was asking for money and here some has shown up. That's a demonstration. Or, oh, I affirmed my own well-being and I'm feeling so much better. That's a demonstration. So when we say demonstration, we're saying made real to our experience, made it so we could perceive it, right? Our true expression, our expression of the truth of the nature of God, brings forth in our experience that truth in whatever form we're ready to experience. He goes on in this point, it is your duty to be healthy, prosperous, and free. Wow. Can you imagine a bunch of people caught up in the throes of the Depression hearing that? Your duty to be healthy, prosperous, and free. It is your duty, he says, to express God to the utmost of your power. And what always happens is when we go to the utmost, we find we can go a little further later, right? To express God to the utmost of your power. And then he says, and you have no right to relinquish your efforts until you have accomplished this. Now, if you've listened to any of the earlier shows, you've heard a little bit about how some of the early teachers were doing some kind of treatment process over and over again for hours. And Emma actually did one of them, she says, 3 days on her knees to make sure that her son had the finances to get through a college education, right? If we are willing and able to be in that place of knowing the truth, knowing that the power is here, that we can express that power, then of course we're going to express and experience everything else. In the second point on this page, you demonstrate the state of your mind at any given time. So if you want to know what you believe or what you've been thinking, look at your life. Yeah, I've been brought up against that one many, many times. And I've been shown beyond that many, many times. My home, my world, my car, my friends, my relationships, my work, all is showing me what have I been thinking, how have I been feeling about things, and have I been expressing God? All right. He says, you experience in the outer what you really think in the inner. As I said, if you want to know what you believe, look at your situation. Yeah. This is the meaning, he says, of the old saying, as within, so without. Whatever's going on in here is what will show up out there. I'm going to put a little side comment here about me and my work. If you've been following this series, you have seen me in a lot of different environments. Right now, my work has me moving from church to church all up and down the West Coast, and it's been marvelous. And whatever is going on, wherever I happen to be at the time we are putting this show together, is what you see in the background. I've actually created this. I created this for a whole lot of reasons. One of them being it was time to get this word out to a much broader audience. But also, I flourish when I'm not stuck in a routine. And so moving and shifting and changing is one of the ways that I can ensure that the work that I'm doing within shows up in the without in beautiful ways, because I am not falling into old habits of thought. All right, let's go on and back to Emmet and his thinkings. Obviously, as we go on to the next slide, change your thought to change your life. Isn't this the essence of new thought? You know, whatever I have been thinking brought me to this point. If I'm ready to shift out of this, then I need to start thinking in a new way. But he makes an interesting point here. He says, of course, changing your thought for a short time is the easiest thing in the world. Everyone does this when he goes to a metaphysical meeting, whether that's a Sunday service, a Wednesday service, a prayer, prayer gathering, even meeting with your prayer partner, anything like that. You know, I so enjoy doing treatments because I love that space that I'm in. The technique, the trick is to hold that space, even when I'm not actively, quote unquote, doing a treatment. Because actually, I am constantly manifesting in the world around me what is really going on inside. So he says very clearly in the next point, if you want to change some condition in your life, you must change your thought about it and keep it chained into health, into true prosperity, into inspiration, or into anything else you may be needing. The power is transforming itself in us, through us, as us, and for us, in the world around us, in our own body and being. This is the essence that he's trying to get us to understand. Now, if he had stayed around on the planet just 20 more years, he would have had another scientific concept to explain this. In the late 60s, a man named Ilya Prigogine, a Belgian scientist, developed a concept that in the early 70s he received the Nobel Prize for. And that concept is something that is known as dissipative structures. And what he's saying is that any structure, whether it's a body or a chair or a car or the world or the universe, only exists as long as there is a flow of informed energy moving through it, maintaining that structure and flowing on. His concepts included the idea that if it's coming too hard, too fast, and you don't have enough things in place, you may fail. That's dissipating. Or if it's coming too slow or you've got blocks against it, it may fail. Your system may fail. The way I imagine this is every one of us is a whirlpool in a flowing stream of energy. This is the power. This is the life force, the élan vital. It is also the intelligence, the wisdom, yes, that allows us to be truly who we can be. So in the second point on there, where I forgot to put a bullet, he says the power is present everywhere. It belongs to nobody in particular because it belongs to all. It is waiting at all times for men and women to call it into use, not merely in crisis, but in every problem, however small, every day of your life. Every day, every problem. For the women who were writing at the turn of the previous century, at the turn of the 1800s into the 1900s, they used the word evil. He's calling it problem. Any issue, any difficulty, anything that causes any kind of distress can be turned around just as we allow this power to flow through us. And this is the purpose of a treatment, is to open ourselves so the power flows through us so fully and clearly and cleanly that anyone around us begins to experience the effects, right? And then he says in the last line of that paragraph, the fact that most people do not suspect the existence of this power does not change the fact that it is there. In modern science, we can see that the Newtonian physicists had no idea what happened at the quantum level, right? Or the cosmologists and the astrophysicists are looking out there and they're going, wait a minute, there's something there we can't see. It's doing something. We don't know what it is. And they don't know whether it's dark energy or dark matter or something else entirely. The fact that they can't explain it doesn't mean it isn't there, right? This power that is flowing through us, that is our life and our being, is the power to transform our life and our being and the world around us. And that was what Emmet was teaching. And he did it so clearly. In his next slide, in our next slide, he gives one of the tools that he uses. And this is a very powerful tool that is in all of his prosperity books and in the healing books. He says, you already have a mental equivalent for everything that is in your life today. Nothing that's in my room, in this space, or in any of the spaces you've seen me in, could exist if I didn't already have in my mind the possibility of its existence. Isn't that interesting? He says then, and you must destroy the patterns for the things you do not want, and then they will disappear. In Emma and Emily's work, Emma Hopkins, Emily Katie's work, they talked about that as negation, denial, dissolving what is no longer useful. And then Emmet goes on to say, you must build a new pattern or mental equivalent for the things you want. That is, the things you're ready to experience. And then he says they will come into your life. Mental equivalent, we have the image, but we don't have to keep focusing on it. We don't have to keep concentrating on it. What we do, as I said before, is we allow our thoughts to move in this range of harmonious, positive, loving thoughts that are related to this desire. So let's say that there is a desire for a new relationship, someone else in our life. We have an idea of what that might be. We might even have made a list of the qualities that we admire in the people we have known, that we would like to see in this new person in our life. But we don't need to focus on that list. What we focus on are the qualities of the divine: harmony, beauty, joy, well-being, feeling prosperous, feeling in good relationship, feeling loved, being loving, all those things. We keep our thoughts in that range that have to do with being in good. How we might accomplish that individually with each of our each of those experiences we are ready to experience, right? Each of those things that we want or desire, but we don't use those words because that holds them away from us. We feel the possibility of them. We feel these harmonious feelings. If you've been following the work of Joe Dispenza, his suggestion is feel a lot of gratitude for the fact that it's already here. Don't focus on what it is. Feel the gratitude and the appreciation and all the love and life and joy that you can feel because you already have it. And that, again, is what the more and more modern versions of the New Thought teachings of previous teachers have been bringing forth. So Emmet was a very powerful teacher, very clear, and made a huge difference, not only in the lives of the people who heard him or the people who read his books, but also in the people who used his materials to create a way of life that was free of an addiction, because people changed their mental equivalents. They changed their patterns of thoughts. They stopped thinking of their own individual ego as all they had to rely on, but became aware that there is a greater power that is working in us, through us, around us, and for us always, a higher power. One of the guys I used to work with when I was rehabbing houses a lot was a marvelous roofer who had been a Baptist preacher. And he was very active in the 12-step movement and relied heavily on AA because he left the Baptist church as a very addicted alcoholic. He used AA. He used the system, the treatments, the process. He had a marvelous sponsor, became an amazing sponsor, relied heavily on what Emmett Fox taught around the Sermon on the Mount and the Ten Commandments and the other ideas that are supplemental to the big book. And he said he used to love to go to the meetings and listen to people talk about their higher power, because this Baptist preacher said, my God is always expanded and enlarged when I hear others describing theirs. I remember him every time I think about 12 Steps, AA, Emmet Fox, or any of these books. Yes. So Emmet did not live forever. Because he lived in a hotel suite in New York, he could just shut down and go off and do whatever he wanted to do whenever he wanted to do it. And he shut his church down every summer. Who wants to be in New York in the summer anyway, right? So July and August, he would shut the church down. He would close their offices. They were done for the year. He would get on a train and head out to Unity Village outside of Kansas City, Missouri. He would spend a week or 2 or 3 there. Even when Charles was mostly in California, it was really important to Emmet to be at Unity Village. And then he would take his train back to New York City, get on a ship, and head to Europe. Every year except during World War II, he spent August in Britain and in France. And I'm guessing he probably went home to Ireland too, but I don't have any record of that. He was, he didn't live high on the hog. He lived very comfortably wherever he lived. And he often went to restaurants because, well, in hotels you don't cook. And he began to connect with various young men in those restaurants who were waiters, who were ready for a leg up or ready to learn something more. And so Emmet became the sponsor for a number of young waiters who were ready to become whatever they were ready to become, whether it was an engineer like himself or a speaker like himself or a teacher. And he had them learning the metaphysical principles that were present in all of his books. Now, when I was first being introduced to Emmet Fox outside of the Golden Key, I was learning about the person. It was in my New Thought seminary days. And we had a marvelous instructor who some of you know, a woman named Jody Stevenson. And her way of introducing the various teachers from the beginnings of New Thought was to walk around the room with an envelope. I told you about this when we talked about Nona Brooks. Well, I didn't get Emmet Fox, but we had a marvelous student of the Bible in the group. Oh my, this man knew the Bible inside out and backwards. He had grown up in the Baptist tradition. He drew Emmet Fox. And, well, it turned out that the guy who did this, the student who drew Emmet Fox, was in a relationship with his beloved husband. And he's looking at the life of Emmet Fox, and he has come to believe, based on the restrictions that Fox placed on having people come into his hotel room, especially being anywhere with a woman, and his connection with these young waiters, he's fairly convinced that Emmet Fox was not straight. Isn't that interesting? And yet, so many men related because he spoke so clearly. And so many women related because he spoke from and to the heart. Well, in August of 1951, Emmet Fox was in Paris, France, and he suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and passed on. And many, many, many people grieved tremendously because they would no longer hear his voice. You can, however, hear just a few recordings, not just the AI versions, but the actual recordings on YouTube. They are not on any of the websites devoted to him, but they are available. Emmet Fox, the turning from the 19th century New Thought world to the 20th century New Thought world. An amazing man who has made a huge difference, for which I am very grateful. And I'm very grateful you're with me on this journey. Thank you so much.